I am Madeline Mealy Holt, Vice President of the Cape Cod Writers Center and host of Books in the World. Books in the World has been highlighting the work of Cape and regional authors for more than 40 years, and we're very proud to be part of this. Today I'm here with Nancy Shoemaker, who has written a marvelous book about the women of Barnstable. Now, while we're talking about the women of Barnstable, we're first going to talk about Marion Voyemir, who was the founder of the Cape Cod Writers Center and who interviewed hundreds of authors on this show. And I'm going to look here to read to you a list of some of the well-known people that are in the archives at the Cape Cod History Archives at the Community College, such as Mike Wallace, Rebecca West, Paul Theroux, Edwin Gorey, David McCullough, and I didn't write them all down, but I think Arthur Fiedler was on, even though I don't know if he was an author, but he probably was a friend of Marion's. Nancy Shoemaker, welcome. I'm talking about Marion because she was a personal friend of yours and inspirational for your
She certainly was.
Your life.
Yes.
And
yes.
We're going to get into that in just a minute, but the book is Women of Barnstable by James W. Gould and Nancy Vile Shoemaker, published by your press, the West Barnstable Press, in 2021. And it profiles 200 women who lived between 1700 and 2021, or not quite.
2020 was the last
2020,
departure date.
Yes. So I have been gushing with Nancy as we prepared this interview for today about how I found the book like eating a box of candy. I would read about this one woman and I'd say, wow, that was really interesting. She was in 1882 and she was doing all these wonderful things, and it's like you can't stop. The next one is just as interesting as the last.
We would have wanted, Jim of course is not with us any longer, but that's what we hope to hear, and hope that we would encourage people to say, oh, I want more, and then go out and do a little more research of their own or read other books or,
But it's a real
tease.
It's a tease. Well, I think it's a real service because I've said this more than once to you, and I'll probably say it more than once during this interview, but I don't think people of my generation for sure, and certainly the younger generation, don't always know about these how accomplished women were in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s.
They're not in the printed word very much. You have to really dig for them.
Right. You have to, and I'm going to jump right in and say, for example, if you want to talk about women artists, well, you have to dig around and find them, even though there are plenty of them. And women, and I've learned from your book, women musicians as well, quite a few. So we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, or I am. So why don't you talk about how the book came about and your work with James Gould? And I'm going to hold up this picture so that people can see him. He's a lovely man who died in...
We lost Jim in the middle of April of last year, 2021. And we were talking about the book. He had moved to Oregon to be with his two daughters. We were talking about the book as much as we could right up until the end. And I got the idea of the book, but he was the seed of the book. Let me first tell you a little bit about him. And I hope you don't mind, I brought notes because there's so many interesting people. I don't want to forget something. He was an educator. He was a historian. He was a pacifist, author. He made quite a few books and did so much research in Cotuit, where he lived for much of his life, the last part of his life, and all around the town of Barnstable. He really was a powerhouse. He was educated at University of New Hampshire. Pennsylvania. This is in 1944. The World War II was ending, but he did have a 2-year stint in the National Guard and helped to release prisoners from some of the concentration camps. He was a real peacenik. His mother was such a pacifist that she was a close friend of Eleanor Roosevelt. So he grew up with this atmosphere. He was a Peace Corps director in Malaysia. When Vietnam War came along, he educated people on what they could do for the peace mission and how to become a conscientious objector. And he was a Quaker. So he joined the ranks with, I have a list of many people, Mother Teresa, the Dalai Lama, Rosa Parks, Nelson Mandela, to name a few, who in 2017 was awarded the Peace Abbey's International Courage of Conscience Award.
Jim was.
Yes.
Yes.
And part of that, too, was because he had done this Women in Peace website, where he wrote about these women and gave a brief paragraph of women over the years who have fought for peace. He then started realizing so many of them, or a surprising number of them, were from Barnstable or from Cape Cod. So he started up another blog of women of Barnstable, actually called barnstablewomen.org. And so I said, boy, Jim, this is so interesting. Let's enlarge it. Let's print it. This is what I've been doing since almost I was born. I was a daughter of a printer. And so we had this very happy relationship of the book for at least 2 years.
So that list of people that he was associated with was really fascinating. And I'm sorry he isn't here with us today, but he certainly inspired you. And did you want to say anything more about how Marion inspired you?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can go on and on.
No, I have this picture of her on the set with Tony Hillerman, who is a mystery writer as far as it says American Detective. That makes sense. Yeah. So this is what the set looked like when Marion was doing it.
Back when it was C3 TV in the old days, yes.
Well, it was really the origin of cable television that got her started with this.
Yes.
I think she said, let's do something with the fact that the cable is available to us. And what I've read is that she was interested in giving local authors some exposure and some support, because people like Mike Wallace didn't really need it. I mean, we used their names to highlight, the history of our show, but the mission of the show is to bring small press people together, local authors, and give them the opportunity to get some exposure.
Encourage writing.
And publishing and promoting. Yeah. So tell us about your relationship
I met
with
Marion
her.
in 1989 when the town of Barnstable was turning 350 years old, the incorporation. And my English teacher from 8th grade recommended me as a printer. And she really turned me on to history, because in high school, my history teacher was a football coach, and he talked about dates and wars, and I was like, oh, yeah, okay. But she brought out the interesting human stories, the gutsy stories that make up our history, and really got me interested in becoming a local historian.
And you have done a lot with that subject. You were the coordinator of Tales of Cape Cod for many years, and you lead tours around Barnstable, and I kind of think of you as the go-to on local history.
Well,
you and a few other people, but you really are
it's my
one
drug
of
of choice.
Your
I
drug
love
of
history. But Marion was the author of 20 books. I'm sure you've done a lot of things about her, but being the director of the Craigville Conference Center, she was just an incredible woman. And she started with a couple of other women, started this group of writers in the Writers' Conference, because she did believe in writing for all, for even the person who wants to do just their own little memoir.
Yeah.
So that was admirable.
Well, I remember you talking about writing when you accepted the Mercy Otis Warren Award. Encouraged the audience to write their own thoughts, because you never know who's going to come by years later and learn something about life in our time.
And one of those people who can come by years later is yourself. I mean, I find, you wake up at 2 a.m, you open up your computer, I find myself reading some things I wrote years ago and go, wow.
Well, I'm going to jump in too. You found information about 200 women, and today, if we get to it, we're going to talk about maybe 20 of them, a few of them, and we've organized them. You and I have talked about this. We organized them more or less by profession or by area. The book is organized chronologically, which gives you an idea of what life was like in each of those eras. And then we started talking about, wow, there were these musicians and poets and architects and, who knew, doctors. So I was going to say, why did you pick these 200 women? I don't know if that was
A lot of them came from Jim's blogs.
Yeah.
A lot of them came from he and I both being on historical commissions and part of, we both have been members and on the boards of maybe 6 or 7 historical societies, We've always read about it. It's been a hobby and a passion of ours.
Okay.
But, yeah.
So, do you want to jump in
Sure,
and
yeah.
talk about
I have
as many of these as we can
I'll
get
do
through?
some early ones first, and then
Some
we'll,
early ones,
like
and think people who are pretty well known to those of us who know anything about Cape Cod history.
the first one I have. She was born around 1710, and her name it's Syucy. I pronounce it as Suchi.
Uh-huh.
And in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts archives, there's records of her controlling the land of Great Island off of Osterville, because it was land owned by the Native Americans, and they wanted to make sure that the Europeans coming over here weren't going to be bringing their cattle over and using that land for grazing, because the Native Americans had their own use of the land, which is interesting that she would be a woman to be allocating the use in the farming plots. Mm-hmm. And also that this was a leadership role that was not uncommon with Native American women. They were expected and welcome to be part of leadership.
Yes, very good. And she was born around 1710.
1710.
So we're talking pretty early in colonial history to us. Yes.
Yeah. And the next one is Mercy Otis Warren. And so I will hold up her picture. I hope I don't move it around too much. And I'm not going to talk a lot about her because we could spend 3 shows on her, but she was born in 1728. She really was maybe the female warrior for independence from our controlling country of England. And she particularly took up the fight when her brother was no longer able to do that. She wrote scathing plays about Governor Thomas Hutchinson. Some of the things she said almost make me embarrassed. I mean, it's like, whoa, she really was a fierce fighter. She wrote a pamphlet on the omissions in the Constitution, and that resulted, with a few other authors, in the Bill of Rights. She also wrote a 3-volume history of the American Revolution, and her history book was the first history book written by an American woman.
And we're going back to 1728 to 1814, so pretty early for her to be outspoken and publishing.
So many stories. Oh.
Now, the next story I love, because those of us who maybe are new to the Cape and we notice the names of streets.
Mary Dunn Road.
Mary Dunn Road.
We have another road coming up later on, too. Mary Dunn is a road that used to go from 6A to 28. The airport has enlarged and it's been broken in the middle. But this was a woman woman of color, who lived in the northeast section of where the airport is now. She was accused in 1842 of the murder of a missing man. Now, she used to sell yarb, which was like an herb tea or beer. They describe it as potent. I assume there was alcohol involved. This man was named Henry Chase. He was seen walking to her house with his pail full of some spirits. And they never saw him again, but they did find his pail at her house. And she was accused and arrested for murder. And what was interesting was they never found his body, but Lemuel Shaw, who's a man who was very well known in the area, became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Massachusetts. He ended up saying there is no way you can commit this woman, and got her released. It was a very important time in the history of our country and making these rules that you had to have sufficient evidence before you could bring someone in. She lost her life when her house burned down, but there is a pond and a street named after her.
Well, and she spent some time in the old jailhouse, which is the oldest.
She was committed to jail, and I believe it was at the jailhouse. Yes, yes, but we're not certain of that. Yeah. She was held.
Okay, I am going to jump into the next category with you of the civil rights. You have organized several women who were absolutely active at an early time for civil rights. Would you like to talk about one or two of these people? If not,
Sure. First of all, Lucy Gibbons Morse. She was the daughter of the prison reformer and Quaker Abby Hopper Gibbons. She was born in New York City and was an eyewitness at her rooftop, escaped the mobs of the New York draft riots of 1863. Over 100 people of color lost their lives in that event. A lot of people don't know that. Yeah. She was part of the Underground Railroad, and her home in Chelsea was looted because of that. She was also a teacher and an artist. She wrote public children's books, and she started the Catuit Library. See, these women have very interesting, complex accomplishments.
Yeah. I loved reading about all the different women. Every library that we know of in Barnstable has founded.
There was a woman behind it, pretty
much. As a librarian, of course, I'm always interested. Margaret Moseley.
Yes.
First of all, Lucy Gibbons was back in the mid-1800s. And died in 1936. I like to mention the dates because for me,
I have them. I didn't know.
No, it just helps. Since I'm the one who's saying these women were pretty outstanding for their time, I just want to mention that we're still talking about fairly early times in American history.
But we're moving up there. So Margaret Moseley, born 1901, she was a civil rights leader, peace activist. She was the founder of the Cape Cod chapter of the NAACP. She was president and board member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and was a recipient of the Martin Luther King Jr. Award for the National Fellow of Reconciliation. But her interesting story in Barnstable and on the Cape had to do with the reverse freedom riders, and I probably have to explain that a little bit. In 1962, segregationists were upset with some of the freedoms that President Kennedy was affording people of color. They were very angry, and they wanted to embarrass the president. So they were lying to people, to families, giving them a bus ticket to come up to many cities in the north, but particularly Hyannis, because that was his summer home, and telling them that the president would be greeting them at the bus, gave them a very nominal amount of money, and said there were jobs, and acted like the people on the other end were waiting for him. And they did this to blindside the people at those destinations. Wow. So she worked with Reverend Warren from the Unitarian Church in Barnstable Village, again, 1962, and made sure that people had a place to live and jobs, and many of them, not a lot, but some of them did stay on Cape Cod. But a mean thing to do, and yet Margaret Moseley made it into something good. And one of the women I mentioned is Victoria Bell, and her family, some of them are still here.
In the interest of time, we're going to jump into the arts, and we picked 4 or 5 people. A soloist with the Boston Symphony Orchestra in the 20s, Amy Beach, a composer.
At age of 21 years,
Then the next one was the teacher of Leonard Bernstein.
Yes.
And how is that? She spent 43 summers working with him.
She was with the Longley School of Music, which her father had started, and studied at the Paris Conservatory. In 1944, he would come to her sound studio that she had set up in Catuit, and he composed his Jeremiah, his first symphony, on her piano. She named the piano Jerry after this symphony, and when she passed away, he got the piano and he got the original score. So Leonard Bernstein was very involved.
Who knew that these kinds of things? Now, let's spend a little more time with Elnora Pinckney Rose.
Okay. They're all so good.
They're all so much fun. Okay. As I said, you can't stop. Here's, the one that we're jumping over into PhD
Susan
in
Godoy.
Music. She was from Harvard, passed away at 99. She was still around in 2020.
And she was 3 years old when she had written her first 6 classical pieces, had played with the Boston Symphony Orchestra as a 13-year-old. Incredible woman. But anyway, Elnora Pinckney Rose.
Great. Favorite story.
She was born in 1886, died in 1963. She was the daughter of enslaved people on an island, St. Helena Island, off of South Carolina. It was unfortunately a large slave colony. In her 20s, she, by now times are changing, and she was able to leave. and she moved to Hyannis. She married Louis Lima Rose, adopted many children from the South, which is very commendable. And she was a businesswoman. She was an adventurous. She bought 30 acres of land in Marston's Mills. And on that land, she built this big 80-foot-long building, a dance hall. And she named it Roseland Dance Hall after the Roseland of New York.
Of New York. I want to be sure everyone heard that. She built a dance hall off 149.
Route 149.
In Marston's Mills.
Yes.
Go ahead.
And she had people such as Ella Fitzgerald, the Cotton Club Orchestra, Count Basie's orchestra come and play there, and local musicians played there as well. During Prohibition, I've been researching this one a lot, and I found exactly where the building is, pretty much exactly. If you go down Route 149 and you see Roseland Terrace twice, the sign, and it's a U-shaped road, within that area was where the building stood. And eventually it became a chicken farm, and they tore down the building in the 60s. But she was quite something at many levels. The one little fun line is, they said during Prohibition, when an agent would come, she would, play the old lady and go to bed and stick a few of the bottles in her
She'd
bed.
hide the booze in her bed.
Yeah.
And these are the years that she was active, were 1925, 1928 era. So I love it. I remember when I first read your book, reading about her, and I said, I still don't believe it, but Ella Fitzgerald was right here, right down the street.
We're looking for more pictures. We have some, but we're looking for more. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about Evelyn Batchel? Why don't you pick? We're probably going to have about, I don't know, 10 minutes left or less. So you can jump around.
Yeah. Do you want to do the two pictures?
Sure.
Okay.
You can talk about her.
Evelyn Batchelder was the first woman sculptor to become a member of the American Academy of Design. She studied with famous sculptors, including Daniel Chester French. The one you're holding up right now is, that's one she did in Osterville, in her studio in Osterville, of 12 and a half feet tall, of Thomas Edison. And
Where did that go? Is that around someplace?
Yes, it ended up going to the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
This picture is a building that is no longer there, and the statue is no longer there. But this was a 40-ton bronze statue called the Genius of Electricity in New York City. And she's holding lightning bolts, and in the other hand, she's holding a coil of wire. It's covered with 40,000 pieces of gold leaf.
My goodness.
So,
is she the one who did the doors at the chapel in the Naval Academy?
She did.
That's
yes.
a revered place, those of us who've been there. So with less than 5 minutes left, I think we've talked about 5 or 6 people, but let me just say, we had women in medicine. We just did a little bit about the art. Helen Taussig, who developed the procedure to save blue babies.
Yes, and she worked as a cardiac surgeon and wanted to help. She was very instrumental in about saving blue babies, and that was babies who were born with problems because of the use of thalidomide, which caused a lot of deformities. She designed a shunt for increased blood flow to the lungs, and we could go on and on about her. She was considered the first lady of American medicine. And then there's Dr. Burgess, another woman, lived in Marston's Mills. She studied pediatrics in Italy. She was a chief pediatrician for the New England Hospital for Women, and she was very involved in juvenile diabetes and how to control it and maintain people's health. Her house is now the Burgess House.
That's true.
In Marston's Mills.
Yeah. Well, I'd let you pick.
How about this lady?
This lady is?
This is Norma Phillips. And this woman was a nurse in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Definitely suffered from post-traumatic stress syndrome. I knew her quite well. She was bridesmaid at my wedding. She would describe how, arriving in Vietnam, they dropped them down into hot boiling tarmac onto the airport. I mean, the little details of what they went through is unbelievable. She received so many awards. She's in You have to get the book to see all the awards she won.
Yeah.
Can I do Anne Wood Kelly?
You can do, I think, one more.
Oh dear.
I
Okay.
know. Anne Wood Kelly.
How about you want a woman in business?
Sure.
Anna Sarah Pearlstein. She was born in Russia. She was one of the first Jewish residents on Cape Cod. She was working at a Boston shirt factory and somehow got to vacation on Nantucket, where she met her husband, Max Pearlstein, a clothing salesman. They lived in Marston's Mills. When he died 4 years later, she took up his business with horse and carriage and sold clothing as far as Chatham. She ended up owning the first ladies' clothing store in Hyannis. Ruth Rusher, if I can get another one in.
Barely.
Barely. Okay. She had a degree in education. She was a director of a YMCA. But when she moved to Barnstable, she was heading up the welfare departments in many towns on the Cape. And then she became a tour guide for tourists visiting. Saved 2 men through her swimming abilities. And I guess I have to stop.
I
There's
think
so many
so.
more.
I just want to encourage everyone to find this book. It's available at just about all the Cape bookstores, Chitcom's, Books by the Sea, Isaiah Thomas. It's so much fun. You can get it at the Historical Societies, Barnstable Historical Society, Centerville, the Marston's Mills Library. You can buy it. It's published by West Barnstable Press. I'm encouraging Nancy to make herself available for speaking engagements, especially to high school girls who should know about how brave and energetic women were at such an early age.
And this
in
is
our
just one
history.
town on Cape Cod. I'd
One
love to
town.
do other books on other towns.
It has been a lot of fun and very enlightening. Thank you, Nancy.
Thanks for having me.